Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing 140, and this is kind of a big deal because this is the final run of Swamp Thing Volume 2. And I believe this run lasts till issue 171, I think. And it is co-written by Grant Morrison and Mark Millar together. And I believe this is like one of the first things that Mark Millar ever wrote, at least in American comics. I'm not sure if he worked for 2000 AD and wrote stuff for that, but he probably did. And this is definitely stuff I've never read before, so it's going to be fun for all of us. And previously, in the Nancy Collins run, at the end of that, we had Swamp Thing in his own little green bubble where he was chilling out and trying to just figure out his next move after Abby left him and his child Tefe was taken by the Parliament of Trees. So first things first, with issue 140, we got a cover that's pretty striking, I'd say. There's a very angry, kind of grayish looking Swamp Thing yelling out from the middle of the page. And you can see some blood splatter coming out around his eye. There's some very esoteric writing on some parchment and stuff in the background around him. And it says like Dr. Holland, unknown, other stuff like that. M.I. thing. Basically like the scribblings of a madman. And then there's some Polaroid photos. One looks like it's of some sort of plant and it says unknown with a question mark underneath it. And then there's a picture of a white man with brown hair who's probably in his 30s. And it says, what is Alec Holland? Question mark unknown. And then behind that photograph, there is like a native looking person who has like paint on his body in certain shapes. And he's just kind of standing there looking at us. And we can also see on the cover that this is written by Grant Morrison and Mark Millar with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And because this is like their first issue, this is definitely going to be considered a jumping on point by DC. So as we turn to the first page, we get a little breakdown about who Swamp Thing is, what his life was like before. So we see a nice serene picture of the swamp. We see Swamp Thing watching Tefe play in the water, and she's having fun splashing and swimming. And then we get a little panel of Swamp Thing embracing a naked Abby. And then we get a face of Swamp Thing just looking very happy and content as he thinks about all these things. And over these images, we get narration that says, he was the swamp god, wood elemental, good gumbo man, the spirit of the bayous. He had a wonderful daughter in whose soul the earth's green flame burned. He had a human wife who loved him, crying his name in ecstasy. And each night, hot dusk descended, and the gators dreamed their ancient dreams, and the liquid stars and the lantern moon were strung among the trees to light their magical house in the forest. He was a god. He was happy, happy ever after. And then we turn the page, and the narration continues, and then he woke up. And on this page, we see a full-page splash of a naked man waking up from a sleep in a cold sweat. And I believe this is the man in the photo from the cover. So he's a white guy who's in his late 30s, early 40s, I would guess. And of course, it's nighttime and he's looking very worried. So we're being led to believe that this is probably Alec Holland and he's having dreams of being Swamp Thing and that everything we've read previous to now was a weird dream of his. We also see on this page that the name of the issue is Vegetable Man. And there's also a quote by a man named Dylan Thomas that's on the bottom corner of this page. So I'll read that. It says, the force that through the green fuse drives the flower, drives my green age, that blasts the roots of trees, is my destroyer. And as we turn the page, we see the man is just laying in bed thinking about his dream that he just had, and two people just come into his room. One of them is a younger woman, and the other is an older, large man. And the woman says to the man who just woke up, Dr. Holland? Alec? Alec? And as Alec Holland turns to her, she says, hi, how are you? And the older man who's standing behind her says, we just got here, and they told us you finally regained consciousness. Coincidence, huh? And Alex sits up and he says, what am I doing? And as Alex sits up, the woman gets kind of scared and she says, don't try to get up, Alec. They said, but she's cut off as Alec can't get up and he like falls back to the bed and he says, oh God. And then he grabs his head like he's in pain. And then the old man says, they said you'd probably feel pretty rough for a while. My advice is to take it easy for a few days. So the two just take it upon themselves to sit down at the bedside of Alec Holland. And Alec looks at them as he tries to recover and he says, where am I? What is this place? I feel like shit. And the woman says, you're still in Peru. And the older man says, don't you remember what happened? But as Alec tries to recall, he says, what? I don't remember anything. How did I get here? And the woman begins to pour him a glass of water, and she says, you were here when we arrived, Alec. You've been here for 4 months, the last 3 weeks of which you've spent in a fever. Before that, you were researching native plant hallucinogens. Here, take some of this. And as Alec sits up and takes the glass, he says, thanks. I am pretty thirsty, I guess. And as Alec drinks, she continues explaining, who they are, and she says, we're here to record and document indigenous shamanic techniques before this whole area goes under the bulldozer. And the older man interjects, and just in case you've forgotten, I'm Lawrence Weinberg, and this is Ann Palmer from Berkeley. Ring any bells? And Alec answers, yeah, right. I'm starting to remember things now. And then we get this really weird panel where we see Ann and Lawrence just staring at him, and Ann says, well, don't wear yourself out. Everything will come in its own good time. Anyway, ours is an anthropological expedition, but we kind of met somewhere in the middle. And Lawrence adds, it's a good thing we did meet you, Alec. You've been very ill. If it hadn't been for the floods, we'd have gotten you out of here weeks ago. This hospital was the best we could do, I'm afraid. And as Alec begins to remember his dream, he says, it was like years. I hallucinated years. And just as he says that, we see a very large nurse come in, and she puts her hands on Lawrence's back and says, I think the doctor should maybe rest now. He should not talk so much. And it seems like Lawrence and Ann reluctantly agree with her, because as they leave, she hands Alec his diary, and on the cover we can see that it says, from June of 1993 to November of 1993. And as she hands him this, Ann says, it sounds like an offer we can't refuse. I'll see you later, Alec. Oh, and before I forget, I brought your journal. I thought you might want it. And it's interesting because Alec seems like he's confused by this journal because he says, what? But Ann doesn't really take note of that. And as she leaves with Lawrence, Lawrence says, oh, and Michael sends his regards, by the way. Take care. And as Ann leaves out the door, she says, get some rest, and we'll see you later. And as them and the nurse walk out of the room, Alec begins to thumb through the pages of the journal, and he says, right. And as we turn the page, we see that Alec Holland begins to read more and more of this journal, and we also see that his room is not empty. There are like many, many different patients in this room, and the one next to him is completely covered in bandages, almost like a mummy. And as Alec reads, he begins to moan in pain, I assume, but Alec is engrossed in his journal, which says, the small team from California who I met last week have been immensely helpful. Their work is more concerned with shamanic practices here, but they do seem interested in my search for previously unclassified plant hallucinogens. It's very important that we locate these elusive specimens before this whole area falls prey to so-called development. I'm coming closer to the source of the rumors of a naturally occurring vine that combines within its chemical structure both the Harmony alkaloid and the dimethyltryptamine, which would make it possibly the most powerful aboriginal psychedelic currently known. And then Alec's reading is interrupted as he hears another from the bandaged man in the next bed over. But then he goes back to reading, continuing, one imagines this would inevitably be far more potent and effective than the ayahuasca mixture or any other DMT derivatives familiar to us from the accounts of Burroughs and McKenna. There is, in fact, the possibility that I may just be close to the Ur plant of South American shamanism. And just as he reads that, the man in the bed next to him begins to freak out, going, and it seems he's in so much pain that as Alec pulls the curtain back to look at the man begins tearing off his bandages and he's arching his back very high. And the man's screams have actually brought the attention of the orderlies. So we see a couple of men come in with another table and they transfer the screaming bandaged man to that, and then they take him out of the room. But surprisingly, even as they're doing that, Alec just seems annoyed that he was interrupted. He just says, Jesus, under his breath, and then continues reading as the man is screaming and being wheeled out of the room. And the journal excerpts continue. Meanwhile, I've been experimenting with the plentiful supply of Stropharia cubensis mushrooms to be found in the pastures here, strange time dislocations, and very strong visionary experiences of my body as an alien floral thing. The local medicine man is a shady character named Roberto, but he seems to have taken an interest in me and promises that he'll be able to obtain a sample of the snuff made from this mysterious vine. I feel I'm standing at the door of some unimaginable dimension. I've become completely obsessed by the idea that spiritual symbiosis between man and the plant kingdom is not only possible, but essential to our survival. Those weird images of some kind of human-plant hybrid. In addition, I haven't been feeling too good lately. maybe I should lay off the shrooms for a while. And that's the last thing you read, so we can assume that after that journal entry, he got sick for 3 weeks, probably from experimenting with these psychedelic plants. Then as we turn the page, we cut to some time later, because it's daytime now, and we see Alec is hiking with Anne and Lawrence. And Anne is saying to him, so you're saying you actually hallucinated a whole life for yourself as some kind of nature god. That's out there, Alec. And Alec replies, well, I've been thinking about it, and the only thing I can come up with is that I was being presented with some clumsy image of plant-human symbiosis. I mean, I still had a lot of psilocybin in my system. The plant imagery was crude and overly literal, but the basic idea of a profound rapport between human and vegetable intelligence is valid. There was a sense of having passed through incredible trials to reach paradise. And Lawrence chimes in, it all sounds very symbolic, Alec. And Alec says to Lawrence, I know, but it's not just symbolism. It's about evolution. It's about some kind of truth that just doesn't fit well into orthodox linguistic structures. What really convinces me I'm onto something is the fact that the human brain is already equipped with specific DMT bonding sites. It's like our brains are waiting for the message from these plants. DMT is the most powerful psychedelic known to man, and yet it is completely and safely metabolized within the human body 15 minutes after ingestion. And this part is probably definitely the Grant Morrison influence in this script, because I know he was all into like psychedelics and stuff. And this is also like for 1994, this is probably blowing the readers' minds. But nowadays, this conversation is had every week by Joe Rogan on one of his podcasts or something. So it's definitely kind of played out now. But I imagine at the time, this is probably the first exposure to any of these ideas that most of the readers of this comic had at all. And the art even kind of shows this, because in the panel where he talks about DMT being the most powerful psychedelic known to man and how humans have receptors for it, Alec is literally tapping his head with 2 fingers as if he's saying to the reader, just think about it, man. I thought this page was pretty awesome because of that. So anyway, they continue their journey, and Alec continues talking, saying, what exactly is the evolutionary link between the plant and animal kingdoms? What are the plants trying to tell us? And what leaps of consciousness might we be able to achieve when we finally make the kind of sustained, coherent connection with vegetable intelligence that I'm proposing here? That's why I have to see Roberto tonight. If you don't remember from a couple pages back, Roberto is the shaman that Alec has made friends with in order to get access to this plant drug. And because Alec is talking about going to Roberto's tonight, even though he was just in a hallucinogenic fever dream for like 3 weeks, Anne gets kind of worried at hearing this and says, I know this whole thing's got you fired up, Alec, but are you really sure you're up to this? You've only been out of the hospital for 4 days. And just as she says this, they actually break through the woods into a clearing where we can see a bunch of clear cutting happening from logging corporations. So there's nothing but like mud and dirt on the ground and then just fallen trees everywhere. And there's big heavy machinery picking up those trees and loading them into shipping containers. And as they come upon this scene, Alec says, I feel like I've been waiting all my life for this, Anne. Someone has to open themselves up to contact. Someone has to learn what plants are trying to tell us. What's our alternative? So obviously this scene of clear cutting a forest definitely helps make his point, and also puts like a time limit on, he's only got a certain amount of time to get this drug from Roberto because it might be gone soon if this clear cutting operation continues. So we cut to later that night where Alec is going to visit Roberto in his house, and Alec is saying to Roberto, this vine, Don Roberto, what do you call it? And Roberto looks like an interesting fellow because he seems to have 1 foot in tradition and 1 foot in modernism, because he has like a Western style house that's, got wood boards and stuff on the outside. But then on the inside, there is tribal totems and art on the walls. But then there's also like a Coca-Cola can, and he's got a TV that's made by Sony. And even Roberto himself, he's wearing modern clothes, but he also has big ear piercings and a bowl cut style haircut that lean more towards the traditional tribal look. So I'm not sure if this is commentary, like negative or positive. It just is, like this is when, these tribal peoples were kind of being modernized by, Western influences in these areas. So to Alec's question of what this vine is called, Roberto answers, that is something I cannot tell you, Dr. Holland. This is secret knowledge. It will probably die with me. And then the forest too will die, and the knowledge of the vine will pass from the earth. And Alec replies, I hope that doesn't happen. And Robert says, it is already happening. My people are poor. Your people offer them work and money to buy things they see on television. And right here, this is where Alec kind of notices that there's a Coca-Cola can on top of a Sony TV. And he says to Roberto, "They're not my people. I don't want to belong to them. What will happen to me? I'm familiar with the mushrooms and with the Yagi mixture." And Roberto cuts Alec off saying, "This is different. We follow the vine through the door and things, to the other side, to the world's spirit. You look lost, huh? Maybe you tried to get back to the Garden of Eden, back to the world when it was new, and man ate the fruits of the spirit land." And we see that Roberto is getting some sort of pipe ready for whatever ceremony they're about to do. And this is like the coolest pipe I've ever seen. It's like 4 feet long, and it's made of just a single hollow wooden tube, but it doesn't have like a mouthpiece to suck in. It has a forked end that you stick in your nostrils and you inhale it that way. So as Roberto is preparing, the talk about the Garden of Eden kind of throws Alec, and he says, "I'm not very religious." But Roberto looks up and smiles and says, "Sit down, Dr. Holland. I will show you the Garden of Eden. It never went away. It is all around us and inside of us. Are you ready?" So Alec sits down, and Roberto holds out the pipe to Alec, and Alec starts to get cold feet a little bit. He says, "I'm a little nervous, but I guess I'm ready. Yes, let's go." So like I said, this pipe is different. It is actually not something you smoke out of. It seems Roberto loads it full of some kind of powder, and then you put the forks in your nose, and then on the other end, Roberto will blow this powder into the nostrils of Alec. So Alec puts the forks in his nose, and Roberto blows, and instantly Alec flies back away from the pipe because it's kind of a weird sensation. And we can see the powder going out of his nose, so it definitely went up there. And as Alec recovers from the weird sensation of the powder going up his nose, he says, "Oh, nothing's happening. I don't think it's..." But just as he says that, it begins to kick in, and we start to see interesting, colorful balls begin to appear that are like hovering in the air around him. And then as we turn the page, we get the weirdest double page spread of a hallucinogenic drug trip that I've ever seen in a comic. This is going to be kind of hard to describe just because it is so weird, but there's a background of blue, and there's these weird orbs floating in the air, but they're not quite orbs. They're more elliptical, and they have what looks like circuitry coming off of them, but then when you look at it closer, it looks more like a potato or a yam or something with roots growing out of it. And I believe just from past, Swamp Thing trips, that this is what it's supposed to be, those yams that Swamp Thing grows. That's probably what this powder is made of, or at least that's what I'm thinking. So above these weird, colorful yams that are floating in this blue background, we see Alec Holland's body flying across the page, and it's leaving like a red streak all over the place. And then above him and all that other stuff, there's like a filter on top of it that looks kind of like static, like if there's a TV screen with static on it. So it's kind of hard to make out everything beneath it, but that is what I'm getting from it. And over this entire page, there is narration from Alec saying, "Air filled with chrysanthemums, chrysanthemum, patterns, breaking up, cellophane ripping, like white accelerating tunnels, in the air, jeweled labyrinths, invisible labyrinths, liquid mirrors, voices, their voices, swimming in language, breathing language, fluid language, like mercury, visible words, everything made of words, sweating words, fluid obsidian, words, obsidian telling me, what are you?" Then as Alec is thinking all this crazy stuff, Roberto begins to talk to him, and he says, "Dr. Holland, are you?" And Holland replies, And Roberto continues, "What are you? Are you an insect?" And Alec replies, "No." And Roberto continues, "An insect. Dr. Holland, what are you? Are you an animal? Are you?" And Alec replies, No. And Roberto asks, "Are you a man? Dr. Holland, are you a man?" And Alec says, No. And then as we turn the page, we just cut away from that scene. So we're seeing Alec walk very clumsily, so it seems like he's still possibly under the influence, but he's going to another house nearby. And when he walks through the door, we see there's a man sitting at a drawing table, and this guy's just a white guy with super long hair. He's got glasses and a mustache. He's probably in his mid to late 30s, and he's wearing a bright red t-shirt and blue jeans. And we can see on his drawing table that he is drawing a picture of a mushroom. but not like a stylized one. It actually looks like a detailed picture of what a mushroom actually looks like growing from the ground. And as Alec comes in, Mike turns to him and says, "Hi, Alec. So how was the sesh?" And Alec replies, "Strange. I don't know, Mike. I just feel wiped out." And Mike gives him a once over and says, "You look it. I only ever tried DMT once so far. Smoked it in college. That shit's weird." And as Alec balances himself, he says, "Yeah, do you ever feel like there's something incredibly important you have to remember, but your subconscious just won't let go of it? I don't know what it is." And Mike says, "I feel that way every time I get high, Alec. I don't know how many times I've had the secret of the universe right there in front of me, and then it's just not there, or it's some other thing." And Alec replies, "It's not the secret of the universe, But he's cut off as Mike accidentally knocks over the inkwell that he was drawing from, and ink spills all over the page. And as it does, Alex sees it spill onto the paper, and it begins to form what looks like those elliptical things that had fractals coming off of them that look kind of like roots. And Alex sees it, and he begins to sweat profusely and possibly remember some stuff from his hallucinations. So as Mike freaks out about spilling his ink, Alec begins to freak out, and he falls to the ground, and Mike sees this and says, Alec, are you all right?" And then we cut to New Orleans, and we see Swamp Thing's ex-wife, Abby, in bed with Dawn sleeping, and she's awoken as someone is saying, "Run, Abby, run away. Run, Abby, run." And the coloring on this makes it seem like some kind of dream is happening. So Dream Abby gets out of bed, and it seems like she recognizes the voice that's talking to her because she says, "Matt, is that you? Jesus, Matt, I saw you die." And as she's saying this, she is next to her coffee table, and on top of that table is a little plant that's growing. And as she talks to Matt, all of a sudden, the planter for that plant fills with blood, and blood begins to pour all over the table and down to the floor. And she sees this and says, "Oh, Christ." And she hears Matt say again, "Run." As we turn the page, Abby is woken from her nightmare, and we see that there is a raven sitting on the edge of her bed, and it's just staring at her. And this is actually a callback to not only Swamp Thing, but Sandman, because Abby's first marriage was to a man named Matt Cable, and when he died in Swamp Thing, because he died a noble death, he was actually transformed into a raven, and he became Matthew the Raven, who is in Sandman, and he's like a friend of Morpheus. So when she wakes up, she sees this bird, and she freaks out for a second, but behind the bird, it is casting the shadow of a man, and she sees that, and she says, "Matt?" But then the raven just flies away out the window, and as she runs to it, she sees there is a rose that has been left on the ground for her, and she says, "Oh my God." And then she picks it up and brings it to her chest, and she says, "My God." Then we cut to somewhere new as we turn the page, and we see a house from the outside. It doesn't really look familiar, but inside we can hear voices, and one of them is saying, "Lucy, hey, Lucy, what you doing back there?" And then we cut to the inside of the house, and we see the man who was talking is sitting naked watching TV on the couch with a bag of chips resting on his crotch. And this is like an older white man. He's got a very, very long goatee, and he's balding on top, but he's still keeping that long hair, so he's got kind of like a skullet. And as he watches his TV, he continues yelling to Lucy, saying, "You want to bring me some chips and salsa and those Kit Kats? I got serious munchies here, Lucy." And we also see he is smoking weed, so that might be why he's got the munchies. Then we cut to the bathroom where we see Lucy is throwing up in a toilet, and she is also a white woman, and she is naked as well. But she looks younger than him for sure. And she answers him saying, "Leave me alone for a minute. I feel sick." And the man yells back, "Shit, why ain't you watching the movie, Lucy? This is the best bit of the whole friggin' thing. This is where the wave comes right over the top of everything." Then he gets mad because he has to get up and go get his own chips and salsa, and he sarcastically says, "Sick. I'm the one who's sick of this shit. Jesus." So as he gets up, he sets his joint down, and we see that it begins to sprout and grow vines from it. Then we cut to the bathroom again, and we see that the man made a detour. Instead of going to the kitchen, he actually went to the bathroom to see Lucy, and even though she just threw up and looks pretty sick, he is groping her, and he's running his hands all up and down her body. And he's saying, "What's the matter, Lucy? Come on back to bed. Old Dr. John will make you well with his magic wand." And Lucy is definitely not having this, and she's kind of trying to push him away a little bit. And she says, "Give me a break, Johnny. I just told you I threw up, okay? It's the storm. I've been feeling really..." But she's cut off as A loud crash noise happens in the living room. And also I should say that this bathroom is disgusting. The light on the ceiling is covered with flying bugs, and then on the toilet itself and the sink and all the other areas of the restroom, you can see cockroaches and centipedes and other bugs that kind of look like they were actually watching Johnny grope Anne. It was really reminiscent of Anton Arcane with all his bugs and stuff. But I'm not sure if Grant Morrison and Mark Millar were trying to allude to that, or if they were just trying to say the bathroom is disgusting. So as Johnny and Lucy hear that noise, Johnny runs out and leaves Lucy at the toilet, and he says, "What the fuck? Sounds like a fucking tree came down in there." And as he gets into the living room, he says, "All right, what's going on in?" But he is cut off and stopped dead in his tracks, because as he gets into the living room, he sees what looks like a giant hulking Swamp Thing. And Johnny is just left saying, "Shit." But apparently Johnny knows who Swamp Thing is, because he says, "You must be the Swamp Thing guy, right? Chester said, it's cool for us to be staying here in his house and all. He said it's okay. You made a bit of a fucking mess here, man." But Swamp Thing doesn't say anything. And he definitely has like a weird dead stare in his eyes. And we see him open his mouth as if to scream, and he's drooling, and the drool is like coming down his chin and everything. And then we see him point his arm at Johnny, and the arm grows super fast and extends into Johnny's head, exploding it on impact and sending Johnny's brains all over the place. And as Lucy kind of hears some ruckus going on, she's still in the bathroom and throwing up, but she's starting to notice all these insects all over the place. And she says, Johnny, what's happening? Where'd all these bugs come from?" And I guess the bugs begin to like swarm and attack her, because she runs out into the living room saying, "Johnny, help me. Oh God, help me. Oh Jesus, crawling in me everywhere." And then we see the Swamp Thing turn his attention to her as he whips Johnny's body away from him. And she falls to the ground screaming no, as a bunch of bugs and insects begin to, I guess, crawl into her mouth. The art's a little scattered here, but I think that's what's going on. And in the last panel of this issue, we are left with Swamp Thing standing over Lucy as she's curled in a fetal position and insects crawling all over her. So we definitely got a lot of interesting questions in this issue. Is Alec Holland really back? Who is this new Swamp Thing? And what's the deal with all these bugs? But we'll have to wait until next week to hopefully get the answer to those questions. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.